Good evening, good afternoon, good morning to the world. Welcome to the last day of the high-level UNESCO Futures Literacy Summit and the last session of the Millennium Project, a series of futures conversation to explore the future and challenge the question or the habit of short-termism and, question our ways of imagining the future in a binary context. So the aim and intent of the Futures conversation here at the UNESCO Futures Literacy Summit is for MPs to actually have a conversation, to explore, ways by which the future of science and technology, longevity, well-being, education, futures research, and state of the future index as well, to improve how people and organizations and societies anticipate the future, improve how organizations identify and evaluate emerging risks and threats, and as well as new opportunities, and of course, to depolarize strategic conversations to enable a better and wider range of alternatives and options for better decision making. Today, I'm very honored and a privilege to be moderating our session, specifically on post-pandemic futures of work and technology 2050. But before we get into the groove, of having a conversation about futures and technology, allow me to introduce our speaker today. Of course, we for the Millennium Project community, there's no need for an introduction, but of course, let me introduce our speaker as well. Of course, Jerome Glenn is the co-founder and CEO of the Millennium Project and the lead author with Elizabeth Floresco and the Millennium Project team of the State of the Future 19.1 report of the Millennium Project. And among other State of the Future reports that has been published in the last 20 years. He was the Washington, D.C. representative for the United Nations University, as well as executive director of the American Council for the UNU, since in 1988 to 2007. Jerry has 40 years of futures research experience working for governments, international organizations, and private industry in science and technology policy, environmental security, economics, education, defense, among many sectors. And he has addressed or keynoted conferences for over 300 government departments, universities, NGOs, UN organizations, and corporations around the world, and a variety of future-oriented topics. Jerry invented, of course, the futures wheel. It is a futures assessment technique, including futuristic curriculum development and concepts such as conscious technology, trans-institution, telenations, management by understanding, definition of environmental security, among others. But I think it's very important that I need to highlight this. Saturday Review named him among the most unusually gifted leaders of America for his pioneering work in tropical medicine, future-oriented education, and participatory decision-making systems in 1974. He was instrumental in naming the first space shuttle, the Enterprise, and banning the first space weapon in SALT II. He has published over 100 future-oriented articles. He received the Donella Meadows Medal, Emerald Citation of Excellence, honorary professorship, and doctor's degrees from 2 universities in South America, and is a leading boomerang stuntman.
So that's the important part.
Yeah. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Jerry, on to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like the conclusion of this, if possible, to be that you'll actually schedule some time for yourself in the next week or two to take off an hour without interruption and read the 3 scenarios, the work in technology. They're really good. I mean, I've been doing this stuff, as is pointed out, for a while, but these are rich scenarios. They're detailed. We've all seen many reports around the world of the future of work and technology, and quite frankly, they're relatively superficial. Before we started this work, we had to read everybody else's, well, everybody's a big word, but we read a lot of reports, somewhere between 30 to 50. And a lot of these things describe the end state of something after 5 years, by the way. Most of them went out about 5 years. But they really didn't talk about the cause and effect stuff. It's one of the areas that we're getting weak on in futures field. We like to describe the end state of something, but not how it got there. And describing how you got there, the if-then cause and effect links and decisions along the way, finds out what's plausible and what's not plausible. Anyway, I will come back to that point a few times along the way. This is the report. I'll say I will begin to share a screen here, see if I can do this right. Let's see, we can get rid of that part. Let's see, are you seeing my screen now or no? Oops, yes, no?
Yes, but you need to show
enlarge
it full slide. Yep.
Yeah, okay. Now, one of the things that I've happens with a lot of stuff happens on my computer that it shouldn't. And sometimes my mouse does not come over properly. Now, whoa, isn't that interesting? I've got little lines, red lines. You see that? As I say, a lot of strange things happen on my computer that shouldn't happen. Now I can't get my mouse over there. Boy, isn't that, now we got it. Okay, now come back over here, come back over here. And there we go. Okay. What got us onto this was that we assess our node chairs around the world on what they think is important to do next. And several years ago, it was the future of work, and technology was rated the #1. So that's why we took this on. There's a couple of things that's important to consider here, though. We know that the concentration of wealth is continuing, and the COVID epidemic seems to be, or pandemic, seems to be increasing the concentration of wealth, because those with the financial resources and are able to continue the investment into investments, and the stock market keeps on going up, but the average person is going down. So that concentration of wealth is going, and the income gaps continuing to widen. Employmentless economic growth, as we've seen with the stock market, but not the unemployment, continues to be the new norm. Return on investment is usually better in technology and in finance systems than it is on labor. So money tends to go where it gets the best return. And since you've got a global system, it's globally concentrates as well. Future technologies can replace much of human labor. So long-term structural unemployment is a surprise-free future for us. That's not a very good idea. So what do we do about this? So we decided to review, as I said, everybody else's research. And I want to give you a little bit of feedback on that review. Most of the research looked only about 5 years out. So you can't really talk about economic systems changes and cultural changes much in 5 years. That's why we picked the 2050, because that gives you enough time that you can actually talk about serious change. Also, none of the reports, and I did keywords searches on all of these, none of these reports mention synthetic biology. And they only talked about AI, and they did not make the distinction between narrow AI and general AI, which I will talk about in a little bit. And they tended to be often just in one industry. So it did not take the big picture into account. So from this review, we picked up what are the questions that weren't asked that ought to be asked, and those questions that are answered poorly. Like, for example, one of the questions that was answered poorly was, what do you do about this? Most of the studies that I looked at basically described the problem and really didn't talk that much about solution. Those that did talk about solution, virtually all of them said the same thing: increase investment into education with a focus on science and technology and mathematics and engineering, which is a perfectly good thing to do. But when you get out to 2050, how many people are going to make a living in those fields? Not everybody. What do you do about the rest of the people? Secondly, when you get out to about 2030 or 2040, whenever artificial general intelligence occurs, if it does, it's not a guarantee, but if it does, 2030, 2040 is a reasonable guess. Well, artificial general intelligence cuts across all these fields real fast. Narrow intelligence is not. It's truck driver stuff, but you can plan ahead, etc. I'll come back to this in a little bit. But it was really lousy on what to do about it. So our Delphi then became focused on just those questions that were badly answered or not asked at all. We took all that material in, then we created 3 alternative scenarios. And then we sent each of those scenarios out as a separate real-time Delphi to get feedback. And then based upon that feedback, wrote the final scenarios. And those final scenarios is what you can get in the report now. And we sent them to all the node chairs of the Millennium Project around the world and said, I would ask you to give these scenarios to people before you have a workshop. The idea was to say, here are 3 alternative futures with a lot of detail, and each country's got to do different things because it's in a different situation. So what do you do in business? What do you do in government? What do you do in education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So we did a whole mess of workshops, and then we took all those responses and got rid of the overlaps, and then put those strategies and the scenarios together into the final report. But before we put those actions in, we then did 5 real-time Delphis, 1 each for the actions for business, 1 for the actions for government. So all of these 93 actions were internationally assessed as to their likelihood and their impact and comments. And the comments, of course, are what makes it rich. So in the report, we distill those comments. This is really important for people who want to do this for real. It's a nice thing to teach in a university, but for those that want to have to do this for real, because having a strategy, and you've got to consider the upside and the downside of strategies. What are the various comments about this? So you get all these comments in there from different cultures and different professions. It's really a rich report. Okay, so then we make it out for public discussion like we're doing right now. I want to first start off with a clear distinction about artificial intelligence, which is not easy to do because artificial intelligence is not that clear, because there's a lot of different variations of it, a lot of different kinds of applications of it, and it'll get more complex as we go into the future. But for right now, I want you to think in terms of 3 kinds of artificial intelligence, just to make the conversation a little more coherent. The first is a narrow. The AI that drives a truck cannot diagnose cancer. The AI that diagnoses cancer does not drive a truck. And if you change the rules, it also gets messed up. Like, in Korea is a big deal when the first Go champion was defeated, and later in China. But if that Go program, that AlphaGo program, if you change the rules from a grid from 19 to 19, you changed it to like 20 to 20, AlphaGo would get all messed up because it's based upon a set of rules. It's a narrow definition. That's what narrow intelligence is. General intelligence is quite different. General intelligence is more like us in the sense that we can figure out what to do about a novel situation. We call our friends, we read some books, we do some internet searches, we do all kinds of stuff. But that's what general intelligence can do. It can also, if we have it, it can also do robot calls, so to speak, to call up experts. It can also search the Internet of Things. It can go through sensor networks. It can go through other AIs. It's general intelligence. It's not a narrow intelligence. Now, the reason I stress this is the difference between narrow and general, in my view, is like saying, okay, well, they're both artificial intelligence, right? Well, this is like saying the fax machine or faxing and the internet, well, they're both part of the information economy, information revolution. Yes, they are, but they're really different in their impact. It's that kind of gigantic difference between narrow and general. Now, I stress this because what you do in anticipation of narrow is a lot different than what you do in anticipation of general. Those distinctions were not made in those studies. And I am shocked that they were not made in those studies. Okay, and then the third one is the one that Elon Musk is warning us about, and Hawking, before he passed on, was warning us about, and that's superintelligence. That's what science fiction is warning us about. And I agree with them that we should be panicking now about that, even though general intelligence may be another 10 to 20 years. The reason is that if we don't get the initial conditions right for how general intelligence gets created, then how it evolves into superintelligence can be good or bad for us. In science fiction, saying, here's how it goes bad. We'd also like to know how it goes good. But superintelligence, the distinction that I make between super and general, is that superintelligence creates its own goals, its own modus operandi, its own approaches, its own behavior patterns, independent of our understanding. Independent of our understanding. And that's a little scary. That's like, as some people say, it's like creating a new species, a universal species on the planet. It just happens to be not cytoplasm, it happens to be other material, but it's a reasoning beyond and using stuff beyond our control. So these three distinctions should be made whenever you are dealing with people about artificial intelligence, so that you don't continue the confusion. Because just saying AI does this is like confusing between a fax machine and the internet. They're really different. And insist that when speakers speak about these things or seminars, that they make the distinctions. Well, were you talking about narrow here, or are you talking about general? And when you think about narrow, like take the truck driving. Yes, we can make a forecast about how soon artificial narrow intelligence will drive a truck without a truck driver. You can make some plans, and not all the change is going to happen in one day. So you can plan ahead in a linear way for this transition. You can say, okay, these truck drivers are going to be made obsolete first. They get the retraining for some new sort of work. You can plan ahead for this. And people are doing that. But for general, you can't plan ahead in the same way as easily, because it cuts across everything. So one of the big impacts, one of the big surprises in working on this scenario was you can see how unemployment can be affected and new jobs can be created at the same time. But when it hits to general, you could go from an unemployment rate in a country, for example, say 5%, to maybe 50 to 70% within a year or two after hitting general. That shock is we don't want to experience that shock. So that's one of the reasons for doing these scenarios, that's why we did these workshops around the world. Let's get thinking about it now, but it may take us 10 years or more to get it together. So that's we got to start now. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, these studies just talked about artificial intelligence and maybe even some robotics, but I saw none of them, not one of them, as I mentioned, talk about synthetic biology or genomics. And someone say, well, how does that impact? Well, first of all, I'd like to go on record that I think synthetic biology within 50 years will be understood as a bigger deal than the Industrial Revolution. Think of how many things biology can do that we don't do. And think about things that biology doesn't even do that we might be able to do. It's an extraordinary amount of stuff. And the biology and the technology will actually overlap and start to merge as well. Those impacts are just staggeringly big deal. Now, I'll give you a simple, tiny little example that you can use. For those who are not aware of synthetic biology, imagine you're sitting in front of a computer screen like this. You load up a little program and say, okay, I want a microorganism. So then all the genetic files and all the things that relates to like little microorganisms line up. So they're ready to go. Then you say that is in a spherical configuration. So then that lines up some more. And then that can pick up dust, and then narrows it down to a smaller amount. And finally find the genetic materials that you need in order to make a life form. So then you put this on your screen, you put the little genetic materials together, you assemble it like a CAD CAM sort of a system and check it out. Is that coherent? Okay, fine. Then you buy the genetic material, which you can do today. You buy it and assemble it, and then you create this little organism, and then reproduce like crazy. So it'd be, imagine like a little pile of sort of salt-like thing in your hand. Put it in the corner of your office before you go to sleep at nighttime. Then all night long, these little things are rolling around, picking up dust, and then ending up at the other corner. So the next day, you come into work or in your home, and you look in your corner, and you see this little pile of dust. And you get rid of the dust, and then it's ready to go for the next day. Now, no vacuum cleaner, no vacuum cleaner salesman, no vacuum cleaner parts, no supply chains, et cetera, all that line is unemployed. So synthetic biology can also cause unemployment, not just AI, folks. Synthetic computational science is another one that a lot of people are not paying attention to, and they should. Computational science, which means also computational biology, computational physics, computational engineering, computational intelligence, all kinds of different computation. All that simply means is you're making a simulation to run a lot of experiments to speed up scientific understanding. In the old days, including the present tense, we say you form a hypothesis, you design and explore, you do the observation, then form a hypothesis, then you design your experiment. Well, the experiments we have today, mostly, you'd put them in a laboratory. That's equipment, that's office buildings, that's personnel, that's all that stuff. Electricity for the lights. Now, if you can simulate what you're looking at and run a whole mess of simulations, so you're double checking, but you can do these things real fast, then you don't need all that time. Also, when you do a laboratory experiment, there's only a couple of hypotheses you're working off of. Whereas with simulation, you can use thousands of hypotheses and thousands of hypotheses. So this will speed up. I mean, we think that there's been a lot of breakthroughs in science in the last 25 years, right? Well, the next 25 years is going to be much greater scientific breakthroughs. Not even talking about technology yet. We're just talking about science, understanding. Now, of course, from that, we draw our technology. But computational science speeds up the game tremendously. So that means a lot of that scientific enterprise that's based upon physical laboratories will shrink. Cloud data analytics. You've got all these intelligence analysts analyzing countries and all this sort of stuff. Well, a lot of them can be replaced by the cloud and data analytics. Nanotechnology, two kinds. What we have today is big machines making little things. Nanotechnology for coating of cars, paint, and all kinds of stuff. We're using it, a lot of nanotechnology today. But the big deal will be the one that hasn't happened yet. It's the one that Eric Drexler is talking about. This is where you have atomically precise manufacturing, where you're having little things, making little bigger things, making little bigger things, making little bigger things, making a house, so to speak. That part of the nanotech revolution hasn't occurred yet. When it does, it can become a gigantic thing, because that means that you can distribute the means of production to the world on industrial production, potentially. Internet of Things, tele-everything, tele-everybody, semantic web, quantum computing. You know, people go running around saying blockchain is a secure system. Well, with quantum computing, you can break codes faster. Quantum computing is going to be important for computer security, both ways, cracking and protecting. China, if you don't know this, you do a Google search. China, quantum computing, 2.5 billion years. Because they did a calculation that they claim would take 2.5 billion years to do in a supercomputer that they did in 200 seconds. So if that's correct, then the age of quantum computing is now here. You can also do a Google search on IBM public access quantum computer. They've got one with 53 qubits or so. So you can actually do running some experiments. So quantum computing is here now. It's beginning to take off. And the implications are for security are gigantic, computer security gigantic. Telepresence, holographic communications, intelligence augmentation, collective intelligence, blockchain, 3D, 4D printing, both materials and biology, drones, driverless cars, other autonomous vehicles, conscious technology, the relationship of consciousness and technology becoming a continuum. And the key point here is the synergies among all of these. Because we tend to think, unfortunately, of linear forecasting of technologies. What's the future of AI? What's the future of nanotechnology? What's the future of synthetic biology? Well, but we know that that's not what's actually happening in the world. What's happening in the world is the integration of technologies and the synergies among the technologies making completely new capacities. I mean, if you went back 30, 40 years ago and said, forecast the future of flashlights, you probably wouldn't have said a video camera. You might not have said a calendar. But all of these functions now are being integrated into a portable device that we walk around with. The idea of looking at the future of technologies and their impact on work, you can't look at just single technologies by themselves. You can, but it's not as useful. Think of them. You can also think of them as like a Rubik's cube. Mixing and matching things before. If you really want to have some fun, and let's say you're going to give a talk on X, what are all the elements of X? And then do a cross impact matrix, the element 1, element 2, element 3, element 4, you go right down the line. Then take the same ones across the top. How can element 1 affect element 2? How can element 1 affect element 3? And within each box, you say, affect it in a good way, affect it in a bad way, because things, can go either way. And so it's the integration and anticipation. One of the ways that we define wealth or making wealth is you're putting things in new combinations that people value. So we'll be doing that, these technologies together. Think of how they mix and match together, and then their impacts on work and the future of life in general. Okay, so each scenario is about 10 pages of rich detail with cause and effect links that illustrate decisions. Now, a little pause here. The original reason scenarios were invented by Herman Kahn at the Rand Corporation was to figure out what we didn't know that we should know about preventing World War III. Military historians' knowledge is based upon the idea that you still survive the next day. In other words, like after World War II, Japan is still there. After World War II, Germany is still there. But after World War III, thermonuclear war, we're not there. So the risk analysis and the way of reasoning is different than we had known before. So we had to figure out how do you deal with the unknown in this way? So Herman says, all right, we'll write a story, and it has to be plausible. So if we get to something that makes no sense, we have to stop and rethink. What happens if there's, and they're doing this in 1950s and 60s. So imagine that there's no, you're in the 1950s or 60s, and there's no thermonuclear war for 30 years, which means there's a different set of players in Moscow, and the world is in a different situation, and the technologies are you have all these unknowns. So how do you convince all these unknown situations that you're crazy enough to press the button? Remember, the idea of deterrence in the Cold War was you have to at least think it's possible that the other side might very well blow you up. All right? If not, then those little ships can go right into Cuba without a problem. So how do you convince 30 years into the future that you're nuts? That was a legitimate question. Now, the answer, so in this writing the scenario, you stop writing and said, okay, we have no idea how you make that work. So you stop writing at that point. And Herman came up with the idea of nuclear fallout shelters. This was the birth of why we had a civil defense nuclear fallout program. Because if you're in Moscow 30 years in the future and you see television coverage of massive traffic jams going out of New York City, out of Chicago, out of Miami, out of Los Angeles, out of San Francisco, what do you conclude? Those Yankees are crazy. The gringo's going to press the button. You are nuts. Stop the ships. That was the purpose. Now, you couldn't explain that purpose during the Cold War because it would destroy the entire strategy. So some of these scenarios we may never see because they were very classified sort of stuff. But that was the idea. So if you simply describe an end state, you lose that richness between present and future. If you don't have the cause and effect links and the decisions, and you also don't find out what you don't know. Like, for example, when I did these scenarios with the work in technology, and in scenario 3, where we talk about the guaranteed income, I figured, okay, how do you make it financially sustainable? Because you're not doing it for just one day. It should be continuing. It has to be sustainable. How do you make it financially sustainable? Well, you would prove it by a cash flow projection, just like you do with a business. The money comes in, the money goes out over time. How does it work? So I couldn't find any cash flow projection on sustainable income. That was a shock. You have all these people talking about it, but they didn't have any cash flow projections. So I learned about that. So then in the Delphi, we had to say, okay, where's the new money coming from? So we had the elements to make the cash flow projection. All right. So the first one was called, it's complicated, a mixed bag. In this situation, the technological diffusion is a little similar to how it was with the internet. The internet sort of bounced down with packet switching around the world in different ways. It wasn't an even lockstep moving forward. It was a patchwork all over the place. And you have good decisions, and you have dumb decisions, and you have no decisions. So it's a complex bag, and that's a rich tale of 10 pages of explaining that complexity over time out to 2050. The second scenario, if you have friends that are just too Pollyanna, thinking everything's going to work out, have them read scenario 2. This is a nightmare, but it's a plausible nightmare. For example, we know that the internet is reinforcing silos of thinking. The more you click a certain way, the more you get that certain way, so that you get reinforced more and more with your little bubble of thinking. So the whole world continues to do this, which means the decisions that require cutting across humanity, like global warming, terrorism, other AI, other sorts of things that require human species decision, don't get made. Because the silo is just breaking up. You can't get across the systems because they don't trust each other. All right, so who starts to fill the gap of a lot of these activities as things fall down? Well, local militias, just like when any society breaks down, like Somalia or whatever, local militias take over. Organized crime takes over. Also, some mega corporations take over. So you have a much different political structure evolving into 2050 with this one. It's a pretty negative scenario. And if you get too depressed reading that, stop reading and jump to scenario 3. Scenario 3, everything works out just fine. This is where countries actually become reasonable. They anticipate these future technological changes. They do experiments on guaranteed income. Arts and media help change the culture to make it move. For those of you who don't know, that in my own culture in the United States, the big culture changes that happened in the 60s people talked about, that was driven by music. It was the music and the words of the music that drove the, quote, cultural revolution in the United States. So the idea here is the same thing. To make the transition work, you have to move culture as well, how we think about work, how we think about jobs. And that's going to require a lot of the music, television, movies, arts in general. Okay, here's the assumptions between the 3 scenarios. In scenario 1, business as usual, you still have about 2 billion people employed. Now, in the year 2000, the workforce is about 3,000. We're just talking the workforce, not total population here. And in 2050, projection is about 6 billion workforce, but that'll probably be a little higher because people will probably live longer than we think and be healthier than we think. But nevertheless, for right now, just conventional projection, maybe about 6 billion. So this means in scenario 1 out of every 3 people will have a conventional job. I mean, they have a boss, they have a salary, well, like we normally think about things. But that also means that another 2 billion people are either unemployed or in the informal economy, and maybe 2 billion self-employed, which is an increasing trend, is a projection. So business as usual, by the way, doesn't mean a lot of change. It means a lot of change to 2050, but it's predictable directional change, because we're having the acceleration of the acceleration. So it's still a lot of change, but it's understandable change. In number 2, where you have a lot of things breaking down, you have only 1 people holding things together, 1 billion. Maybe 1 billion self-employed, but you got 2 billion unemployed and 2 billion informal economy. Informal economy is hard to change. Informal economy, for those who don't know, is basically that which is irregular. You're not paying taxes. You're not registered. You're sort of scrambling around to sell some stuff. Maybe you got a local shop in your house. You're not, and you're selling locally your community. This is about 65% of humanity today. That's a lot of us, and that doesn't change so easily. So even in the best case scenario, we figure that's probably about 1 billion people. Anyway, the big variable on the scenario 3 is 3 billion self-employed. We start to understand how we make a living out of being what we're interested in, self-actualization. To a large degree, like myself, I enjoy doing what I'm doing at this moment. And as those of you know, no one hired me to do this. We just Ted Gordon and I just invented this. And more people will realize that the internet makes it possible for people to find markets for their interests and skills so that they don't necessarily have to walk over for a non-existent job somewhere in the future. Okay, so those are the assumptions. And these are assumptions. Again, we're just provoking thinking here. The purpose of scenarios was to lead to workshops. The workshops lead to actions. Actions make the transition a little better. So even when they walked in the workshops, we said, forget about the scenarios once you're in there. It's just to warm you up to think. So scenario 1, as I mentioned, is a mixed success of all these different areas. Plus, you have these giant corporations growing beyond government control. This is projection. All right. Now, the early organization of humanity to a large degree was religion. And then governments grew a new power on top of that. Religion's still there, didn't replace it, but a new power got on top. The image that I think really makes this clear is Napoleon. The painting where Napoleon's getting a crown, and the head of the church has the crown on a pillow. He's going to put the crown on top of Napoleon's head, and Napoleon goes, no, I crown myself. Symbolically, that's the transition. So you still have church, but new power grows on top. Corporations grow on top of that, which is going on very much right now and causing conflict between the two. And eventually individuals will realize how powerful they are with the new systems. So that becomes a new power on top of that. But at this point, those transitions are breaking down. I'm sorry, that's scenario 2. In this scenario, though, they increasingly grow. The new power of corporations don't replace governments. You still have governments, you still have religion, but the corporations just grow a new kind of power on top of that. But at the same time, you're living in a multipolar world and a multi-reality world. Your children will say, Grandma, did you really live in one reality at a time? God, that must have been really boring. How did you do it? Anyway, so we end up with a world that's hands-free, phone-free, laptop-free, AI symbiosis, with all kinds of technologies, just integrating the cyberspace and the technological space. So as you're walking down a street, you're in multi-realities all the time. So the idea of just walking down a street, nothing else going on, not likely to be the case in the year 2050. The aesthetics will be better than this little contact lens at the moment. There'll be artwork, people, just like people have different colored glasses and so forth. These things will be more interesting than this, but it's the idea that you're connected to everything, including the smart city, and you one continuous flow going on. And these devices are right around the corner for people to use. So it's a pretty conservative forecast to say this by 2050. As you know, Elon Musk has already made a machine that can make a fiber so small and another machine so precisely putting that small thing right next to a single neuron. If you don't know about this, you can do a Google search on Elon Musk, Neuralink, and pigs, because they have a video of how they've done this with pigs already, and they can keep track of the rough movement of the pig's behavior. But that potentially can get better and better and better, so that the continuum of the brain, the mind, and technology and the city can become a continuous flow. In a similar way that right now, I would say I'm talking to you, which we know is nonsense because I'm talking to a screen, which is talking to a link to Wi-Fi, which is, et cetera. It's a whole mess of machines between us. But we say, I'm talking to you, just like a telephone in the early days. When I talk to a telephone, I say, I'm talking to you. Well, that's not true. I'm talking a whole bunch of stuff in between, but we just, the stuff in the middle sort of mentally disappears for us. So in this sort of a world, whether we do the neural lace or we do the contact lenses or some other sort of a thing, that the continuum of consciousness and technology becomes a continuous flow. Even our little robots get connected to everything as well as connected to us. So scenario 2. This is the political gridlock increases, what I talked about before. Social polarization continues to get far worse, and it prevents decision-making. Take my country, the polarization between the Trump folks and the non-Trump folks meant a lot of decisions that ought to be made don't get made. So imagine that problem globally and far worse in that scenario. Political, economic, environmental migrations increase ethnic conflicts. When people migrate, this is like what's going on with Syria, going into Europe. That will be small potatoes compared to what could happen in this, because you got not only the environmental migrations happening between here and 2050 more than the past. You've also got the collapse failing states and then the unemployment thing going up. So a lot of mass migrations in different ways are very likely in this. Governments did not anticipate the impact of artificial general intelligence. Hence, there are no strategies in place when the mass migrations and mass unemployment start hitting around 2030 or 2035 or whenever that starts to happen. Financial systems cannot handle the aging. They can't handle the safety nets. And so you have one collapse after another going back and forth and back and forth. So the predictability of what can be done financially is in trouble. So world order has deteriorated in this scenario into a combination of nation states still, mega corporations going beyond, as I mentioned before, but local militias become a big deal, terrorist groups become a big deal, and organized crime becomes a much bigger deal. Organized crime, as you know, is twice the income per year of all the military budgets combined. And that goes even worse in this scenario. Let's not do this one. Okay. So there's your image, the poster child for scenario 2. Let's see, I went the wrong direction here. There we go. Okay. So you've got organized crime, terrorism, corruption, and information warfare starting to overlap. So nobody can believe in anything. And if you don't have any beliefs in anything, you can't make decisions very easily, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We got to prevent this stuff. Makes democracy and free markets an illusion. It's all a fraud. Scenario 3, relax, it's all going to work out. Everything's fine. Governments become rational. The Millennium Project node chairs go to their governments and say, hey, you need to have a strategy for getting ready for general intelligence. You can't just say teach science and mathematics. There's more to the future than that. So they do this. And they conduct extensive research on how to phase in universal basic income. As you know, there's been a lot of experiments going on about this. And for those of you who haven't read them, it's pretty definitive now that when you give people a supplemental income, they don't become lazy. That was the big worry. If you give somebody for nothing, they'll become lazy. That's not what happens. There's a little bit of that, but that's not what really happens is people use that money to invest into something. They invest into a sewing machine and making a business. They invest in their children getting an education. They invest into something. They actually use the money. In general, health standards improve, education improves. This stuff's been shown in Finland. It's been shown in Namibia. It's in completely different places around Brazil, other places. So the question, though, is how do you phase it in a rational way? How do you make it financially sustainable? How does it work? So we've got time to do that, and we should start doing that now. So when we need it, we know what we're doing. Right now, I'm not very convinced we know what we're doing yet. Increasing intelligence becomes a national goal. Because if the world's going to get more and more complex and change happens faster, that means we may have to anticipate better, like this conference is trying to reinforce, and it means you got to be more intelligent. Now, we've got all kinds of ways of augmenting intelligence that we're not using. When I was a child, as many of you too, although many of you are not as old as I am, we were taught that the basic configuration of the brain does not change. If your IQ is 100, 10 years later, it's still 100. 10 years after that, it's still 100. Now we know that that's not true. The brain can rewire itself and get more intelligent. The plasticity of the brain is much more than we thought. And we're learning how to make ourselves more intelligent. On our website, there's 10 little steps you can do. Them. Each one is a little deal, but all together should make you more intelligent. So right now, the goal of education in most countries in the world are two things. One, give you knowledge and make you a good citizen. We would like to add a third one to that and make you more intelligent. We understand physical education, right? We all know why you can do jumping jacks and push-ups. We understand that you can become stronger, and we have physical education to make you stronger and healthier. We understand it and we do it worldwide, but we're not doing that about building the brain yet. So in this scenario, you build the brain. It's important because you want to have more and more people become more and more intelligent and hopefully more and more compassionate and ethical, because the technological means to create good stuff as well as bad stuff increases. So we need a more intelligent, ethical humanity. Self-employment is promoted in this scenario. It's not just evolving, because right now, the idea of self-employment, and I'm not talking just about informal economy, because that's self-employment too, but self-employment that actually makes some money so you can actually grow and move. That's not reinforced that much today, but it is growing in that direction. But in this scenario, it's actually promoted. It becomes an aspirational norm. Wow, you're running your own multi-holding company. All of us can be thought of as a holding company. You have many different skills, many different interests. So imagine, let's say there's 10 of those things. Each one of those, imagine them as being a mini little company. And you're finding the markets for each of those things. All together, you can make a reasonable living this way. We're not there yet. We're not thinking that way yet. And education is not training us to think this way yet. But in this scenario, it does. And one of the key variables on this scenario are the artists. Artists, media moguls, entertainers help to foster a cultural change from an employment culture and a jobs culture to a self-actualization culture. What the heck does that mean? All right. Most of you know about the psychologist Abraham Maslow. His teacher, Freud, told you how you go nuts. And Maslow says, well, here's how you go sane. So the idea is that sane people sort of go through an evolution and then go up and down as they need, because sometimes you get hungry, so you focus on food and not love and belongingness. But the society as a whole is going through this. Take a look at your air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, reproduction, and so forth, the basic physical needs. You go back to 1980 or so, more than half the world was in extreme poverty. And it was a smaller number of population at the time as well. Today, with a much larger population, over 7 billion people, as you know, fewer than 10% are in extreme poverty. Now, yes, it's going to go up because of the COVID virus, maybe another 3 to 5 to 6 million people, 600 million people, yes, but that'll be a pimple. It'll these things go up and up. It'll be washed out. The overall trend is elimination of extreme poverty. That's the direction. You just dot out your lines, run the little mathematics, and you'll see that that's inevitable. So the COVID will just delay, I think, the inevitable. Not inevitable, but it just delays the growth. So the UN sustainability goals to get to unemployment by 2030 was a straight line trajectory, by the way. You do the mathematics, you'll see it. But it'll be delayed a little bit because of the virus at the moment. But we'll get there. So and then it also includes the safety needs. We've got safer cars, safer this, safer that. People don't die of a lot of the things that they used to die of before as a result. So our physical environment is getting safer. And for better or for worse, social media is taking care of a lot of our love and belongingness needs, and even some self-esteem needs as well. So what's next? According to Maslow, what's next is self-actualization. So how do I have, so you can have an economy for each of these sort of things, but you can also have an economy for self-actualization. How do you make a living out of evolving yourself? And how do you reinforcing that with other people? That whole phenomena can become an economic driver in scenario 3. I'll give you
Jerry, excuse me, just a time check. So we have several minutes left, and then what I would suggest is that we go straight to the session after your talk. We go straight to the session of Concepción, and then we can entertain some Q&A after Concepción presentation. Is that okay?
Yeah, I thought, according to my watch, I'm 25 minutes into it. I thought I had an hour.
Yeah, we're about to finish by 12. So no, for me, it's almost 11:53. Yep.
Okay, let me see here. Okay, so I will sprint along. All right. Scenario 3, one of the vignettes is that you can have a personal AI avatar that goes running around the internet searching for you and gives you the daily wake-up call and says, hey, I've got 10,000 things you can do today. I know you can't do them all. So here's some that's just cool to do. And here's some that you can actually make some income. And I've already created for you your smart contracts. So all you have to do is approve it, and you're in business. So you can literally invent yourself every day. So if we're augmented geniuses, take a look at these two guys here. How much of the future did these guys create? So if you have easily by 2030, 2050, millions, if not eventually billions, of augmented geniuses, how much of the future could they create? And these things are already in play. This is not necessarily a surprise free. Anyway, so we had workshops done around the world. These are the various ones. They came up with a whole mess of suggestions. I condensed them down because there's a lot of overlaps, of course. And then we did a Delphi on each one of these 5 categories. So all of these things were assessed. Great details in the report, really great. And here's some examples of some of the actions. One, of course, as I mentioned, make increasing intelligence an objective of education. In parallel to STEM education, create a hybrid system of self-paced, inquiry-based learning for self-actualization, creativity, critical thinking, etc. Create an international standards. This is important. We want to do this next study, as we're hoping to. Is create international standards for narrow and general intelligence with an international governance system to enforce them. Not necessarily like the International Atomic Energy Agency, but along that line. Because if we don't get that initial conditions right for general, as I mentioned before, we're toast. So anyway, so you can get a hold of this stuff later on. The nice part about the pandemic is that we're at a point where a lot of this technology and the work interaction becomes a big deal. We now have some time to think together about all this. You know, when children misbehave, parents will sometimes say, stop, time out, sit down, and think about what you're doing wrong. Okay, we as a species are doing that for the first time. We have a chance to rethink everything, economic systems, technological systems, human relations, all that sort of stuff. So you can get a bunch of these details on our website, and we can go to any questions or on to Concepcion either way.
Great. Thank you very much, Jerry. In fact, I have 3 questions for you, and I think our friends here have more questions to ask. But in the interest of time, what we're going to do is we will let Concepcion present first, and then we're going to entertain some of the questions. Yeah. So, okay. So let me hand this to my Millennium Project Philippine co-chair, Dr. Lizan Perante-Calina, to introduce Concepcion.
Yeah. Thank you, Shermon. Greetings to everyone. Again, welcome to the Millennium Project's Features Conversations organized within the UNESCO High-Level Features Literacy Summit. And this is the last session, and I'm sure we'll be ending on a high note as we deepen our discussion. As we all know, the Millennium Project is a global participatory think tank for future studies with 67 nodes around the world. And I'm happy to share that the Philippines is the 64th node. At this point, allow me to introduce another distinguished speaker, Concepción Olavarrieta, MP Mexico, and she will be joined by Julio Zamora. Maria Concepción Olavarrieta Rodriguez is President of Nodo Mexicano, El Proyecto del Milenio, Vice Chair of the Board of Directors of the Millennium Project, and Mexican Chair of the Millennium Project. Her expertise is in foresight studies and founder of the Social Land Exchange, the Global Millennium Prize, with coverage in 110 countries. And the Futures, the first World Foresight Encyclopedic Dictionary. Her current foresight studies are on the futures of transnational organized crime in Mexico and Latin America 2050, focused on a prevention ecosystem. She is author and coordinator of 2 books, Mexico Towards 2050 and Challenges and Latin America 2050. She has a degree in Diplomacy Sciences by the National Autonomous University of Mexico, with further studies of law, economics, foreign trade, strategic planning, fundraising, and foresight. Alternately, she has worked in the public and private sectors in Mexico and abroad, and has extensive experience in marketing and technical economic and financial feasibility studies, tourism and urban developments, real estate marketing, foreign trade, fundraising, and foresight studies. She has given worldwide over 1,000 lectures. And let me introduce also Julio Zamora Batis, an economist, and he has a master's degree in development economics from Williams College Center for Development Economics, USA. And he studied at doctoral level in economics at the University of Texas. He is also an assistant director in trade and taxation, Secretary of Finances, Mexico, Mexican ambassador to Latin America Free Trade Association, Peru, and Nicaragua. He's a congressman in the Mexican Chamber of Deputies and Vice President World Future Society in Mexico, President of Economic Studies Bureau in Mexico City, and teacher in the Economic School at UNAM and the National Polytechnical Institute. My dear friends, please welcome Maria Concepción Olavarrieta Rodriguez. Over to you, Concepcion.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to share you my screen.
Good, we can see it.
Yeah, we can see
Thank
it.
you. Thank you.
It to be in the full presentation mode.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you so much. So first of all, I want to thank Mara and Lizan for the effort that they have done for our presentation today. And the title was proposed by Mara. So I decided to make a travel along the last 17 years what I have done in foresight studies and organizing different topics. When I made I think that I missed one. Oh no, yes, and just remember you that the Millennium Project is one of the most dynamic think tanks of the world, a model of future's collective intelligence. We're 67 nodes and 2 international networks spanning Europe and River in Latin America. And I met Jerry in the year 2003 when I was attending the first World Future Society Congress that I organized that year. And when I asked a friend to which of the sessions should I attend, he said, you should go and listen to this guy, that he's really bright. So that was Jerry's session. And he was presenting the state of the future of that year. And what really impacted me was the way he approached this. He made the reference in general about the 15 global challenges and all the information that he had gotten in regard to each of them and the holistic impact. So because I've been a consultant for almost 35 years before I met him, so I said, I have to adopt this kind of new method of approaching my studies. So it became along the years like a common thread of my postdoc life. So Lizan Floresco has spoken already about the origin of the 15 global challenges, and I think that Jerry has also mentioned them. And I just want you to remind you the names is sustainable development and climate change, clean water, population and resources, democratization, global foresight and decision-making, global conversion of international technology, rich-poor gap, health issues, education and learning, peace and conflict, status of women, transnational organized crime, energy, science and technology, and global ethics. So one of the first things that I decided to do was to launch something different and to work with a different auditorium that the Millennium Project was focused at that time. So Jerry invited me to a meeting in Brazil, and at that time I found out that they were not working with children or with the students, university students. So Jerry came to Mexico for a presentation of what was the state of the future at that time. And we were together at the office of the president. At that time, we were talking about one of the main projects that he wanted to implement in Mexico. So there we had a meeting with the private secretary of the president, and he came by night for having lunch with us. At that time, he was a president of the Scouts. And Jerry, maybe you can be part of the conversation before I go ahead. And do you remember about these these Scouts badge that you spoke with Emilio?
I'm willing to bet you remember it better than I do. But what I do remember that we didn't do that still needs to be done is I was an Eagle Scout, and to me it was like getting a miniature bachelor's degree in general studies, because you have these 21 merit badges. You get this great education. It's just really, I'm a great fan of becoming an Eagle Scout. Now, but they didn't have a merit badge for the future. Seems like a logical deal. And so we were going to create a merit badge as usual. Well, that never happened, but that evolved into what Concepción will now tell you about.
That's it. Thank you. Thank you very much. So we started with the mission. We started with the Millennium Prize, and then we went up into the Global Millennium Prize. The mission was a future prospective awareness for addressing the 15 global challenges and achieving, at that time, were the 8 UN Millennium Development Goals. The vision were future-oriented leaders, both today and for the longer-term future. And the goals were to improve their creativity, social responsibility, and world solidarity. And we created this trophy for giving that to the children. We also had an author for a song and a beautiful music. So the first pilot project that we started with was with these young people that were the winners of what we of two contests that were running in Mexico. One was the winner of the parliament, and the other one were the winners of the knowledge Olympiads. So we send them the invitation to participate in proposing which will be the future that they will be willing to get to in 15 years. And as you can see, they were very, very young at that time. It was a great success. We had people that were young students that came from all over the country, the winners, and very poor people, even that they were it was for them the first time to come here. And the ceremony, the award ceremony took place at this beautiful castle that we have in Mexico, which is the Castillo de Chapultepec, the Chapultepec Castle. But at that award ceremony, Jerry said, I think that we should have, I wish one day we could have a Millennium Global Prize for young people in the world. So then I catch up also his idea, and they say, we can go through internet and we will try to do so. So we did so, and our second, and established the Global Millennium Prize. And that was part of the images at one of the nicest museums that we have in Mexico. And you can see here Jerry and here Julio Millán from the World Future Society. And these people, he was a representative for United Nations at that time. The third award ceremony, we had Prayer Wells. She was working at that time at one of the agency of the United Nations, and this is the president's wife. She was happy to have this participating in this award ceremony as well. This is the way it looked like, and this guy he was a winner from Congo, but he couldn't come. So the consul was he came and his representation to pick up the trophy. And we had in 2007 the Millennium Award, both, and the Global Millennium Prize, winners per countries. You can see we had winners from Slovenia, Azerbaijan, Korea, Congo. In 2008 and 2009, we had now 3 different kinds of contests. For secondary schools, for university, and for teachers. It was by internet. That's the way we had a poster, we launched it, and we had the 4th award ceremony. Also, this is the president, former President Calderon, the former President Peña Nieto, the Secretary of Education, and the people from the World Federation Association for United Nations as well. And in 2008, 2009, the international winners were from Mexico, Republic of Dominican, France, Slovenia, Azerbaijan, Singapore, and India. In 2008, well, this is the award ceremony. Here are the winners. 2009, 2010. The Global Millennium Prize took place in another beautiful museum that we have, the Diego Rivera Museum, which is a famous painter. Worldwide, this is him. It's a museum. It was very nice. We have the chorus here of the people that were chanting the song. Oh, so you can see we had winners in the case of Mexico for the national contest from all over the states. International winners. We see them here from United States, Mexico, Venezuela, India, China, and Korea. This is Slovenia, Azerbaijan, Korea, and Congo. France, Slovenia, Azerbaijan, India, Singapore, Dominican Republic, Mexico, Azerbaijan, South Africa. And this is the way that we had our statistics during this time. And the way we measure it is that we got 173 different visitors. The numbers of visits that we had were more than 500,000. The pages visited, well, 5,000. We received 7,000 internet hits from 110 countries. The main phrases that we got from the winners were, before this big job, I never thought that the future was going to be so difficult. The future is see what others don't see, listen what others don't hear, and perceive what others don't feel. Today is tomorrow beginning. We can change the world for the better. We just have to wish it. We choose our future. Let's speed our innovations and inventions to improve the future. Another project, and this is part of my life, as I will mention it as a common thread of my Sposat life, is that at the same session in Brazil, I remember the president, the chair of the Iran chair, that mentioned, I think the Millennium Project should have a glossary. And I was something that caught my attention, because it was my first approach to the Millennium Project and to foresight. And then I said, there are some words that I really don't understand. So I decided to go in this second project and to develop that glossary that my friend was saying. But then I found that there were too many glossaries. So I thought that it would be nice to distinguish the Millennium Project doing a very interesting research. So we came out finally were more than 1,000 words and methods. And I got the support, of course, of Jerome Glenn and Ted Gordon to do the whole research for it. Mainly we can see here Ted Gordon, Jerry, and of course, Elizabeth Floresco, Helena von Reifnitz, Brock Hinsman, and Jesus Velasco. It's in English and it's in Spanish. And after that, when I started studying about transnational organized crime, I decided that we had to do something different, because the situation is so serious and so dangerous for humanity that I said we have to work on the 15 global challenges. So that's the way we started with this new book that we have already finished, which is Mexico 2050, 15 challenges. And we invited 18 Mexican experts that were participating as authors of these challenges. So which are the Mexican 15 global challenges? Goals of this book were a better design and implementation of public, private, and social policies for positive alternative futures. The other one was to promote awareness and culture of society, how to eliminate and mitigate threats and enhance the holistic opportunities they may face. To foster guiding projects that triggers and help to recognize the importance of creating better options. What we do is the book that has 3 parts, the 15 challenges for Mexico. The authors prepared a diagnosis, a trend forecast, their visions for change and reflections. And after that, we identified the key factors on each of the challenge in order to build the scenarios and at the same time, the ideas for guiding projects. So we have 3 scenarios: the national fullness, democratic, fair, and peaceful Mexico, futures Mexico, the eternal promise, and agony and desolation, Mexico mutilated and punished and atrocious. And the ideas for guiding projects that are around 50 more or less on each of the challenges. And after that, we saw that it would be very, very interesting if the Latin America region would do also in regard to that. And so that's the way we invited Latin America chairs and experts to participate. So you can see here the countries, the flags of the different countries, and we are still working in this project. And I think it's becoming a very interesting essay, and it could be a replicable model for other regions in the world. I can tell you that I already finished my part with Jorge Mata. We work on the Latin America transnational organized crime, the future of transnational organized crime. And it's really, really important to do something in regard to all the world And I invite all the chairs in the world to integrate this regional study as well. And I think it's a good way to recognize all the effort that Jerry, Ted, and Elizabeth have been done throughout the years to have these 15 challenges positioned all over the world and the people to be aware of it. So these are the different books that the Millennium Project has, which are the Futures Methodology Research, which has 39 chapters, but methods, I think that say 37. The Work Technology 2050 Scenarios in Action that Jared just talked about, the 2030 Latin America study that Jose Cordero was leading, and we participated all the Latin America, and the 3 studies, Futures of the COVID-19 Pandemics in US that Jerry just finished, the State of the Future, the World Foresight Dictionary, the futures that I just spoke about. So here is all my information. And it was a pleasure being with you and speaking to you.
Thank you so much, Concepcion. I think it's time for us to proceed to the Q&A. Shermon, would you like to facilitate the Q&A portion?
Sure. Thank you very much. So we've been having some chat here, as you can see, the chat box, and been seeing a team being quite active. So team, if you would like to ask your question directly to, your musings directly to Jerry, we'd love to hear your comments and feedback, some insights perhaps, or questions.
Concepcion, you want to hit the stop sharing button up at the top there?
Do I still have it?
Yeah, it's still sharing. You have to click it off, otherwise it's
let me learn to turn it off. Okay, let me just find where I shared it. Just a moment, because I don't see it and I'm sharing it.
I think it's up on the top of your screen.
My screen. Right, I think I close everything.
There you go.
There you go. Great.
Yeah.
All righty.
Okay,
Okay,
hello
Steve.
there, and thanks, Sherman. Yes, the conversation I've been musing about right now is this concept of that hoary old concept of future shock, and my interpretation of it as a social condition of reaction, and in some sense, ambiguity, or I should say, fear of the future by large portions of the population. History is accelerating, and some people are feeling very threatened and very left behind. So there is a natural reaction to this. And that's how I interpret future shock. It's a reaction to the future. Yep. And how do we cope with that? And that's really ultimately the question I have for Jerome.
Right. Well, how we cope with that is to read his book. I want to confess on behalf of the Futures community that we were all jealous. Toffler's a better writer than all of us, and we were all jealous, but it was good. And Future Shock did more than any other single book to waken people up to the possibility of change as a permanent condition. So we applaud. It was, I think it's the 50th anniversary of Future Shock this last year or so. And there's a book out for those who are interested. I think it's called, what is it called? It's a book that had a bunch of futurists writing reflections on it. It addressed it to a large degree, what you were talking about. Aftershock, I think it's called. Aftershock. It's got, I don't know, about 30 or 50 futurists writing little articles in there about it. So that's one part of the answer. The other, and the historians in the group may reprimand me for being oversimplistic about history. My understanding of the Renaissance in Italy was that prior to that, everything great and glorious was Greek. And eventually it dawned on people that they weren't Greek, they were Italians. And you could speak in Italian, you could write in Italian, you didn't have to write in Latin and all the rest of this sort of stuff. And then bingo, people had license to be creative. Now that's an oversimplification, but I think it's normal to look back for security when you are unsecure or you're anxious about the future. You know, if you're driving along, you know, walking through a crowd and you get lost, you look back to where you were. Where was I safe last? But sooner or later, like the Italians, they realized, hey, we're Italians. We're in the present tense. We're not in the past anymore. So I don't know how long it will take for that shift. I would have hoped it would have happened by now. But quite frankly, I think to a large degree, some of this but it's happening irregular around the world, I think. So, so one part is to read Toffler's book and then to read the Aftershock. That's one part. Second part is it may be a normal thing to look back when you're insecure, and then eventually it hits you, but that's not where you are, and it goes forward. Third part of it is that's why we're having this meeting. I mean, that's all of us collectively together are in the process of it. A fourth part of the answer to me is there's a moral responsibility to give people both sides of the coin. If we just say, here's what's wrong in the world, and we do that from children all the way up to old age, then it's normal for us to think that everything's getting worse. And if everything is getting worse, then we want to stop any change, because any change makes that horrible future happen faster. A little dog taught me that trick, by the way. This dog was supposed to go out in the middle of the night and it's cold. Dog didn't want to go out, wrapped its leg around the table so it couldn't be pulled away. And I said, that's it. The dog saw a negative future and it said, baloney, I don't want any change at all. And that dog taught me that trick. So part of our job is to say, look, yes, this is a problem. Yes, here's some answers. And you got to do both. Otherwise, in my judgment, you're actually hurting people. So Toffler did a good job. He says, here's some change and here's what you do about it. That's honorable. So I think when we do future stuff, we can't turn away from the most negative. You know, we can't, I mean, we have to look at the most horrible negative thing right in the eye, so to speak, and say, okay, now what do we do about that? We don't want to sweep it under the carpet. We're not going to pretend. Let's deal with it. But understand that we can get through that. And the story that not story, but the part of the answer that I tell to people is that historians have told us that when two or more great powers confront each other, sooner or later they fight and use the weapons of the day. If that was universally true, you and I would not be talking today. There would have been thermonuclear war between Moscow and Washington. It didn't happen. One of the largest, strongest trends in the history of humanity was turned around. That's reason to be optimistic. A second reason to be optimistic is in the early days of the internet, and I was involved in getting packet switching in different countries in the third world, including dictatorships. We thought everything great and glorious was going to happen. Man, we're going to make the world work. We're going to put all the computers together. It's like having a magic wand running around the world and making everybody smile. It was fabulous. We didn't think about child pornography. We didn't think about coordinating terrorism. We didn't think that much about cybercrime. Thought a little bit about information warfare, but sort of didn't push it. But today, the next big jump is artificial intelligence, narrowing to general. And we are having meetings, conferences, articles, all kinds of stuff around technology assessment of AI is the thing to do now. So I think the species has become more wise enough to say, hey, this is a big thing coming up. Let's think it through. We didn't do that, in my view, with the internet. So those are a couple of answers. But the real answer is exactly what you're doing, Tim, and all the rest of us are doing. We're out there saying, hey, wake up, people, get your head out of the sand. You don't have to panic. Some of these things can be handled. And the biggest deal of thermonuclear war was turned around. mean, yes, Pakistan and India can still have a brush fire nuclear war. That's true. However, we're in better shape than people were warning about, and we're warning them so that we react and we act intelligently. So you got to give people both sides of the story. It's a long answer to a straight question. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just going to follow up very quickly. A little bit of a plug, and this gets into those unintended consequences, specifically about AI. And for those of you who have access to HBO, and if you don't, maybe just go for a free trial. Look at season 6 of Silicon Valley, which is a marvelous scenario on the unintended consequences of AI. Those of you who have viewed it know what I'm talking about. Those who haven't, I urge you to check it out. It's a wonderful talk about scenario.
Repeat the name of the show.
It's Silicon Valley, and it's an HBO series. It ran 6 seasons. It's season 6, which is specific to AI, where the inventors of a decentralized internet incorporated AI, and the AI basically took away all the encryption everywhere, and they had to shut everything down because of it.
Yeah. One, while we're thinking about the next question, one thing that hit me as you said that is during the Cold War, some of us had our phones double checked from both sides. And I got used to the idea that I wouldn't say anything negative against country A, B, or C, because if I get out of the airplane, I don't want them to arrest me for some nonsense reason, right? So I became sort of polite. Now, I could be wrong, and I don't have a parallel universe to run an experiment on this, but I think I am a nicer, more diplomatic person because I had lost, quote, my privacy. That's so if it's the case, I mean, like if you list all the ways to have your privacy taken away, including the security and the rest of it, and all of the ways that can prevent it, you'll notice your prevention list is pretty short. So we might not make it, so to speak, on the privacy and security. We might not. It's a scary thought, I know, especially the security part, and especially when you throw in the quantum computing I mentioned before. But the positive side, it could make the species more honest.
I'm sorry, Jerome. I'm going to just say one more thing on that vein.
Yeah.
I spent a year in Baku, Azerbaijan, and I'm utterly convinced that my computer system has been taken over by spyware within that country, which is why my calendar constantly shows all of the Azerbaijan holidays. So yeah, I totally get it. I am with you on that. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, look at it this way. You learn more. That's interesting because I've been in and out of Azerbaijan a lot. And I shouldn't say anything. I don't want to start the thing going. Never mind. Good.
Jerry,
Yep.
Jerry, shall we, whenever you finish answering, Julio Zamora will be participating as well.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Presenting something for the World Future Society. I hope you'll join us and tell us also about your experience with Julio Millán and the World Future Society.
Sure. Well, I'm finished answering the question. It's up to the co-host here. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, Julio Zamora, please.
I think that okay, now he's fine.
Okay, there you go.
Gracias. I would like to begin my intervention referring a little bit of what I've been doing for many years. I began working in planning for the future in Mexico since 1956. We didn't speak about planning for the future, but we were trying to get the state government to have a conception of the future of that part of the Mexican Republic to develop better. And that began in 1956. We made a study group in the Economic Secretariat.
Julio's gone. Is he still there?
Yeah.
Until he comes back, maybe Conception, you might want to fill in for him.
Yep.
I can also,
Okay,
he
yeah.
comes back. Is he
Yeah,
now?
I think he's there now. Yeah, but he's muted. Yep. Okay.
So just let me know.
I don't know when I was muted, but I was telling you that we had a job in the federal government to develop plans for the future in several states. And fortunately, these studies, which were for, just an example, Sonora, Michoacán, the state of Mexico, Guanajuato, Yucatan, and we even made a regional diagnosis for Mexico. All these studies were taken only as propaganda tools for the state's governments instead of applying some of the ideas that we had there. In this context, I began to read the World Future Society publication in 1993 or 94, and I invited Julio Millán to begin this contact. And finally, we decided, the two Julios, decided to create the Mexican chapter of the World Future Society in the first months of 1997. And as we established our organization, we have found more people interested in future studies in Mexico. And we have operated very well. And we now include businessmen, government officials of state and federal level, and a lot of teachers of universities and professionals that work on these matters. And I am very happy to continue this operation because we have an interesting result in universities and business groups that are aware of the need to create the future and avoid improvising or finding problems without any idea for solving them. This is especially notable now with the world pandemic that we are facing. That means that we have a new urgency for the planning of the future, and we should take care of this as soon as possible. I'm sorry to say that the federal government in Mexico at this time does not have an idea regarding either the future short-term or long-term in Mexico. And a result of this situation is that about 20% of the small and medium-sized companies in my country have disappeared in just 1 year with the COVID and the indifference of the government to these ideas. The 80% of the companies or economic groups that survive face a contraction in the general demand of about 5%. So they have difficulties in the access to products they require to work. And we expect to have in 2021 a similar panorama. The fiscal policy in this regard, as I mentioned, is practically doesn't exist. And the government attitude will affect deeply the operation of business in the near future because there is no backing for the work of the small enterprises. This means that we should help small businessmen, increasing their contacts and putting them in touch with each other's outside the usual operating areas. And that means that past pandemic, the roads are planned and industry not, and agriculture is up, a little trade is what will be resulting. So we have a lot of work to do and do it fast, because otherwise the results of the pandemic will be very severe for the general population of Mexico. It has already hurt certain groups, but if we don't take as a study group some measures of activity, since the federal government is not doing anything, we will have a very serious crisis in the next year and the following. So I think that the World Future Society is a very important reminder to all Mexicans and to all Latin Americans in general that we need to participate more in world affairs and not wait for the world decisions to be made and then communicated to us. We have to do something about our immediate future and long-term future as well. And I think that our chapter in Mexico, the World Future Society, is advancing in this matter. And we will have to increase the work in the rest of the first semester of 2021, so we can have something positive to show for the future. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Julio. And also, Lizan, if possible, and Sherman, I would like to show what Julio Millán, the president of the World Future Society Mexican chapter, has sent for this session. So let me see if I have it here. So I want to, can I share the screen?
Sure, Concepcion. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, Julio couldn't join us today, but he wants to share this screen to you. Okay, so can you see the screen now?
Yeah, we're seeing it.
Okay. Let me see how this one works here. Oh, here. There it goes there. So it's a nonprofit association and is boosting future study in Mexico. It was created since 1997, as Julio mentioned, and the purpose is to disseminate the development of future studies in Mexico. It was established in February 1997 to create awareness of the importance of heading the future with certainty. The impact, we have a wide network of distinguished partners located in the main cities of the country. We have contributed to generate the reasonable attention to the future and the importance of its study through courses and conferences. We create future scenarios to know more about the social conditions of the country. We disseminate studies, conferences, seminars, and other results of the public. Our biggest event were the Perspective of World 2015. This was the launching with the Fundación, let me remember the name, but it was a universal charter of the duties and obligations of human beings. And then in 2010, it was the Encounter in Mexico 2010, Building Futures. And in 2003 was the high-level Dialogue, the Future of Mexico and the World, Alternatives for Mexico. I do remember the Fundación Saramago. José Saramago was the guy that when he got the literature novel, he proposed this Universal Charter of the Duties and Obligations of Human Beings. So the President is Julio Millán, the Vice President is Julio Zamora, Vice President and Martin Olavarrieta, Diego Barrena, and here are all the other members. And these are the sponsors of that and the information from that. Okay, so I'm going to close. And do I still have it on the screen?
Yeah, we can still see your screen.
Okay. So, and there was, Julio, would you like to share something more about this? Julio?
No, only that we need to back the companies, the private companies, because we need to identify quickly how can we have a better chain of supply, and we have to define the critical risk so we can cut or minimize interruptions, and at the same time promote the adoption of practices of information and especially of financing, because these problems are looming sinisterly for the future of the companies in Mexico.
Okay, thank you very much, Concepcion. Yeah, so we have several minutes left, for the conversation. So if you have some question for Concepcion and Mr. Zamora or Jerry, feel free to do so. So you might want to open your mic or just put your question in the chat box. So, okay, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Oh.
Thank you so much for the nice presentations. And Concepcion, we did have a conversation about this before, but I would like to bring it up again. That since for you, for the Millennium Project, the Global Millennium Prize is difficult to continue. And in these situations, and we thought that UNESCO might be the best place to, or the best organization that could, in a way or another, promote it, even if they don't organize, but find the way to organize it. I don't remember, Jerry, did we already bring it up with Riel before or not? But since now futures literacy got so much importance, as we see by this summit, I think that after the dust settles and the summit is over and they relax a little bit, maybe the conversation can be reopened for the Global Millennium Prize. If they want to change the name, I don't know if Concepcion would have anything against it or so, but at least the way it was framed and to be continued. It's clear that there is an international interest in it. And if UNESCO would promote it, it would be excellent. And it's really along the line for futures literacy.
I would like to share
UNESCO,
our experience.
Indirectly, UNESCO, we can always say, is one of our in-kind sponsors and previous financial sponsors as well. But UNESCO, it can help promote it. But as Raul can tell you, the politics of UNESCO is not trivial. If they can promote it without changing it too much, that's fine. But I don't see them able to put any money in. UNESCO is in bad financial position.
I didn't even think putting money, but if they promote it at the level of ministers of education, right, and find a sponsor who can sponsor practically just the ceremony and so,
sure,
then
that would be great. It would be great as long as it doesn't become a complex. I mean, I have from time to time, as you know, stopped off in Paris in between country A and B, and would meet with Ryle, and I'd always feel so bad. He'd complain about the bureaucracy for just one little vignette, so that everybody can appreciate this. If you promote something like this, you have to write something up about it, of course. Then it has to go through different people to review it. If one person, the first person reviews, says, great, check, fine, no change, on to the next person. If the next person changes some words, it's got to go back all over again.
Yeah.
So if you have enough people in the chain, you can take 5 years to get a decision. Right? Now, I'm up for doing it, but I'm not up for waiting. What I'm hoping is that maybe we can get a financial sponsor. I mean, the idea of giving awards to children is a time-honored tradition. You know, Coca-Cola or some large sponsor like that would be great to take it on. We almost had something with, was it Google or somebody got close to doing it?
Hershey.
Oh yeah. And they were supposed to put some iron in the Hershey thing to help children's brain development. They didn't do that either. Anyway, yes, it would be great as long as it doesn't end up being a bureaucratic mess. But yes, indirectly, we can say they're helping anyway because UNESCO is part of the Millennium Project.
Right, but at least if we get an official endorsement, even if only under the Futures Literacy activity, and then probably it's easier to get to a sponsor.
Right.
And say, hey, you will have...
Right, it would be good if Conception does the initiation, because the relationship between Mr. Trump and UNESCO is not the best. So I think it'd be better if this is initiated out of Mexico than the United States.
And why don't we ask the people on all the chairs in the world where they have the stronger position to launch this prize with UNESCO? Because Julio Zamora has already pointed out, which is our situation in Mexico. So I will be willing, of course, to give all the information so they can really have those chairs that will be willing to launch it. As far as I know, Azerbaijan is still running the prize inside Azerbaijan.
Yes.
South Africa also launched it.
I was going to say South Africa does some stuff too.
Also. But I can give all the feedback of our experience.
A suggestion. And for those people not in the Millennium Project, now you'll see what we mean by a participatory think tank. What I would suggest that you do is you write up a short thing saying you remember the prize, and maybe put a link or two. We'd like to bring it up again. Would any of the nodes like to start to help initiate this? Because we need financial support, essentially for the airplane tickets to bring people. But if the pandemic goes worse, we don't need the airplane tickets. But assuming that in a year or two, if it got regoing again, the airplane tickets would work. The only reason, Elizabeth, we didn't continue on because it was hard to ask everybody to pay their own way, especially the parent. You had to have yourself, but also a guardian had to go with you. So that's 2 airplane tickets. And that's not easy for everybody.
Right. So I know that it's the financial situation that got here, but then we kept on hoping that it gets better, which didn't. But now maybe it might be online or so. The investment would be much smaller. But then the incentive is then smaller too.
Right. Conception, would you willing to send a note out to the MPPC list?
Well, what I would propose is why don't Philippines start once again with a Global Millennium Prize? What do you think?
Yeah, actually, I have the same thought in mind that maybe we can have a collaboration with our Department of Education. They're very much interested in doing this. So if we'll do it virtually, that would, of course, logistically speaking, it would be easier. But we have to prepare also for the next 2-3 years when everything's get normal. I guess that's a good idea. We're interested, actually.
So we have the right candidate now.
Conception,
I'm going to send you everything. And something that it is really interesting is that all the judges are the chairs of that are experts in one of the challenges they are the ones who determine who are the winners. They have to review, but I'll give you all the guideline to prepare.
Yeah.
Concepción, may I speak with Concepción?
Yes.
Hello.
Hello, Sarah.
Joseph, yeah.
Concepción, I will be very happy to work again with you with Millennium Global Prize. You remember we have we try to begin a collaboration with French. We have I remember I had 2 students will be selected, but they are not. There was not the winner. But I think that it will be very great to develop, because I think that for students and for younger youth people, youth generation, it's very important to have this prize.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This is a good global collaborative project. We can perhaps talk about that later on and explore. Let's explore it together. There are many possibilities on that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, for us, the Philippine MP team, would if we could, after having a really good conversation, try to set something up.
Well, that would be great.
Mm-hmm.
I'll send to all the chairs this information, and then we can start talking about who has the best position to launch it. Okay.
Yeah. In fact, Lizan is saying here that we're on the go. Yeah. We can do it. No problem.
Mm-hmm.
Just give us the details. Let's explore.
Sure.
Let's have a conversation. Yeah.
I'll give you the logistics in general and how we prepared and so on. Of course, I will.
Right. Okay, so we
thank you,
have.
Elizabeth, for me bringing it up.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks, Concepcion. So we have 7 minutes left. Any questions? Feedback, insights?
We can stay a little bit longer. That's not a problem.
Okay, sure. Thanks. Thank you.
I see I have a comment here from Alejandro. Maybe he wants to jump in and share the comment.
May I? This is Maria Watson.
Or Maria, maybe. Yeah, both of you. Welcome to join us in the discussion.
Well, first of all, thank you for the presentation. Jerome, great presentation, Concepcion and Julio. I have 2 questions, one for Jerome and one for Concepcion. For Jerome is how the pandemic impact on the scenarios you mentioned, if had. And after that question, the second is for Concepcion, and is, could you describe the scenarios you listed for Mexico? Thank you.
We wrote, for those of you who don't know, after the work technology scenarios, we also then wrote the US scenarios on COVID. I would say that the impact of COVID on the work technology scenarios, frankly, just speeds them up. The applications of artificial narrow intelligence have increased because you take labor out of the market and repetitive behavior, you're speeding up. I know that in Italy, by the way, Mara, as I understand it, the mayor of Milano had a 10-year plan for AI going into the city, and now he's implementing now. So a lot of stuff that were on the books are now being speeded up. So I would say that the scenarios are still there. They just speed it up. When we talk about the concentration of the wealth, that gets speeded up. So I would say that the increased application of AI and the increased economic disparities are just speeded up. They're still in the same trajectory, but to me, it just speeded it up.
Thank you.
Maria, I think that I have to work on that. I do remember what I can tell you is mainly that are the actions of transnational organized crime through the 25 variables. And the effort of the governments that sometimes they can have a really good foresight decisions to a long-term decision making for having a better country. And you have to start with helping poor people living poverty, and that will be for the best scenarios. And the second one, which is the one that I prepared with Jorge Matar, was pretty much aware about the business as usual. But what can we do? It is more like possible. It's the possible probably future. And we think that we can do some changes if we have the prevention actions against transnational organized crime. And of course, the third one is transnational organized crime throughout the country, which is terrible. But I promise to send you a short information to each of the challenges and prepare especially for all of you.
One other thing on organized crime that we did talk about in the COVID scenarios later was that they get involved in artificial drugs, artificial vaccines, artificial personal protection equipment, which is happening, unfortunately. It also means that a lot of the supply chains for drug smuggling, for example, and illegal animals and other sort of illegal stuff, a lot of the smuggling stuff has slowed down, which is also most likely to press up the price. So in other words, like if cocaine can't get to the United States as much as before, that which gets in is more on demand, so the price of these things go up. So there is an impact on organized crime on this. So the answer is, one, the price of some stuff goes up, the supply chains go down, but then new income streams with COVID goes up.
Yeah, thank you, Concepcion. Jerome, I think I need to ask this question because I might not be able to sleep tonight, if I may. Yeah, yeah. About the AI work technology scenarios, Jerry. You know, I read in one report wherein it says, I think it came from McKinsey. You know, it says that no legal implementation has ever caught up to AI systems development yet. Now,
right.
Yeah, using your scenarios, I was pretty curious, how might state power or regulation play out in the three alternative future scenarios? That's one.
Right.
Second is a question about accountability, right? How and who's accountable? And third is that in the three alternative scenarios, like if one of them, like occur or transpire, or perhaps a mix of it, would this lead to the end of the nation state?
Yeah. Well, let me answer the last one first. That's an easy one.
Okay.
And that is that the analogy I make, the human body is a great teacher. We've got this old reptilian thing back here, some of us older than others, that are running the basic systems, right? But the action, of course, is up here. Now, the nation state is sort of like the regulatory system. Is making sure the borders work and things like that. So I don't, just like religion, as I mentioned, religion didn't disappear as the nation state was created. The nation state doesn't disappear as the corporations grow beyond that. They're just different powers. Each one becomes more powerful in the sense of affecting more people per time, but it's still there. So the need for having regulation, the need for rules, the need for all that stuff hasn't gone away. So I still see that going. It's just that a lot of the action sort of moves beyond that. It's like, in sports, you got to have referees, but the people doing the game are out there in the field. So the corporations are out there in the field at the moment. And that by analogy, then the government is like, running referee, running the legalistics. On the first one, if one of the next studies, anybody who's a donor out there, listen up. One of the next studies we'd like to do is how do you do, we call it anticipatory governance, right? So you're anticipating something that needs to be governed. It's not there yet. So what we want to do is say, okay, artificial general intelligence is not there yet. But it might be in 10 to 20 years. And it might take 10 to 20 years to create the international agreements, the treaties, the implement, all that sort of stuff. It's going to take a long time. So we want to do a study starting now, how you would put together such a system to start the conversation. Others will take it over, but we want to initiate a rational framework for this discussion going on. So we think it will be possible to do that, because I've seen more interest in this than I've seen in other technologies of the past being assessed. So that might occur. On who's accountable, well, accountability doesn't really exist in scenario 2. It's raw power. I mean, it's everybody for themselves business. In scenario 1, it's a combination of increased accountability and decreased accountability. It's a mixed bag. So you have good decision making and dumb decision at the same time, both. In scenario 3, I haven't really thought through how accountability would work in scenario 3. But if you have more and more people trying to make a living out of being themselves, then to me, it stands to reason there's less of a drive to give the other a hard time. I mean, if I'm really liking what I'm doing and evolving the way I want to, why would I stop to give you a hard time? It slows me down. It's dumb. So in a sense, you might need less. I mean, why do you need rules? Because people don't act right, right? So if more and more people, not everybody, but if more and more people act in a nice way because they're doing good stuff, I mean, one of the reasons we have a problem is because people are in a lousy situation. But if you get an improved situation, then maybe you don't need as much of the accountability stuff. But I haven't thought that through.
Can I throw my 2 cents in to Shermon's questions? Since based on what I have seen and in my life in Brussels, well, what Jerry says about anticipatory governance, that's very important, because the way we work now at national, international level generally, is that you have first to have a problem, and then you address it. So until it's not a crisis created by the problem, politicians don't even pay attention, because there is the lobbying at the other side. No, don't put restrictions on us because that ties us up. It slows us down while others will advance. And there is a little bit of truth in this. And as an example, I would just take the Biological Weapons Convention. Imagine that now compare artificial intelligence advancement with advancement in biotech. Now imagine that this pandemic would have been caused by a weaponized virus. We have the Biological Weapons Convention. Good, nice, non-enforceable. So it's good to have a nice convention. It's good to have nice rules, but as long as no one is accountable. And that gets back to the accountability question that you put. And then the international system we have now, then even if there would be enforcement mechanisms, the way you address it, if you have to go through in case of prosecution or so, and even for inspections, you have to go through the Security Council. Guess what? 5 countries, which are probably one of those that are most in problem or have veto power. So we are at the dead end. My point is, regulation does not solve the problem, because usually the way it is done now, because usually it comes ex post factum. It comes after the fact. What should be done, mostly for artificial intelligence, because all the reasons that Jerry mentioned, is really anticipatory governance. Because with that, we cannot afford the situation that we are now. Biological weapons are nothing compared to what artificial intelligence can do if in the wrong hands, or if it evolves in the wrong direction. So it's really futures literacy, so people understand future consequences, potential both positive and negative consequences of their research. And governance understands that it is important to look ahead and to not to pay attention to the lobbying or so, or and just think about what has to be done in order to address a problem before it appears.
One of the things, Elizabeth, you just stimulated in my thinking was the car companies in the state of California. When Reagan said baloney on these rules for gas mileage and so forth, the car company says baloney, we're going to do it anyway, because that's what the market's telling us to do. That's another kind of regulation. So if you have the evolution of like religion, nation state corporations, if that's a legitimate model, then it would make sense that accountability also goes up. So that if I'm company A and I have no way to have my AI audited, and you are company B and you do, and then if Concepción wants to hire between two companies, who's she going to hire? She's going to hire the one that can be auditable. So another form of accountability that might come into play, like for example, every serious corporation working on general AI knows that even they're in competition, knows if they don't get those initial conditions right, we're all toast. So at the same time they're competing, like including nation states competing, they know, the ones that are actually doing stuff, know that they've got to work out some protocols. They've got to work this thing out or we're going to mess it up. So that accountability is another kind of accountability, even beyond the marketplace. It's sort of like the survival capability, you know? So those are some musings on just what you just said. Okay.
Or if not, the artificial intelligence will just outsmart us and they will create rules for us. So somebody will have some.
That's the good news. It could get a lot worse. They'd say, you know, look, these humans, get rid of them.
Yeah, that might be true. And if that's the need for the well-being of the planet, might be the case.
Hey, I got a selfish interest. I want to stay.
or in fact, and as Elizabeth have said, if we couldn't figure it out, let's ask the AI as being your political advisor, you know, figure out how.
Yeah, and that is one of the things, is that the monitoring of the thing, it'll be so complex. There's no way that humans can do it by themselves. But it's human plus the AI. I don't know if those of you know this. Remember when AlphaGo beat the human, right? There was another experiment later. You had an AlphaGo champion, a human champion in Go, and then you had the AI with it playing against the other alpha, and the human combination beat this AI by itself. So human plus the AI is the winning combination, at least
so far. So far.
So far.
So in order to add some fuel to the discussion, you would be interested in knowing that the Legal Affairs Committee of the European Parliament adopted guidelines on the use of artificial intelligence for military purposes and in the health and justice sector. Guidelines,
exactly, that makes exactly the point that I said. Because they cannot agree. That's why they are guidelines. I lived enough in Brussels to be able so because they cannot agree on any regulations. Guidelines are good to be respected. Good. And if you didn't respect that, too bad.
Yeah, but still the thing that, the argument is coming up, it is already something. Somebody starts thinking that we need to think about the consequences of what we are creating and what will, develop by itself.
Mara, it's on top since 2016. When I arrived there, it got already at the top. And what you see now, it's what came out after 4 or 5 years of scratching heads and negotiations.
So we have EU guidelines.
Yeah,
So
and there's a
yeah,
good question. There's a good question here from Alejandro Solis Cruz. In fact, I think this we can connect this question to the conversation we're having. Will there be confrontation between public and private, as far as AA global goals are concerned? If there are global goals, do you see some sort of confrontation between the public sector space and the private sector?
He's a private sector. He's a private guy. He belongs to the World Future Society in Mexico. So.
And is it referring to artificial intelligence or generally?
Yeah, Alejandro, can you expound your question further, if that's fine?
In the global goals, in reference to military activity and the limits of the government with assigned resource and many others factors in this shield.
Well, if I take a look at, you're talking about the Millennium Development. I mean, yeah,
the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah, I mean, private sector and government sector are collaborating on a lot of these things. I mean, there's a gigantic amount of collaboration. It's also cool for corporations to say, look what we're doing.
Yeah, they have the corporate social responsibility, remember? Yeah.
Right. As a matter of fact, I think I remember this speech. I've forgotten which UN Secretary General gave it. May have been Kofi Annan. Said, look, I think he went to the World Economic Forum and said, look, I can't say business is good if you guys aren't doing good stuff. So get serious. And out of that speech, if I remember correctly, that's where that whole relationship of UN and corporations on the whole compact, or whatever it was called.
We do, yes, there was the global compact, but now we have the corporate social responsibility, and companies sign up. There are boxes to check. How do they approach how their work helps achieve the Sustainable Development Goals? And I lost track now how many companies, but there were hundreds of them already, and they are accountable. So they have to renew each year and to show that, yes, what they are doing is respecting the targets to achieve the targets of the Sustainable Development Goals, which I think it's extraordinary. And most big corporations try to do that, because if not, then they are showed that, hey, what are you doing? Yeah.
And also, most business people understand if you solve a real problem, you get a real profit.
And I think that there are some financial incentives too, but I'm not sure about that. But I think there are some financial incentives for the companies that achieve a certain level in the corporate social responsibility.
Right. Good. Thank you. That also reminds me of another part to the accountability business. The International Standards Organization. If you have, let's say that your company A is ISO compliant on something, and another corporation is not ISO compliant on the same thing. And if you're China or the United States, which company do you hire? All things being equal, is the ISO compliant. And that's evolving a global ethics system and evolving another kind of accountability. So it would be interesting if you guys, Sherman, maybe what you could do is do a tree of accountability going in different ways. You've got the marketplace accountability, you've got the ISO accountability, you've got the social, PR stuff out of the, in a sense, you're evolving a variety of accountabilities rather than just governments, because as we're aware, corporations can move faster than governments. so it's going to be hard for the governments to continue to regulate.
Yeah, and just a quick point to Elizabeth's what Elizabeth raised earlier about corporate social responsibility. We also have this creating shared value, or the CSV. It's really helping the society, solve pressing pressing problems. No? And like, for example, in the Philippines, if you have this corporate social responsibility in key areas, you will have tax incentives for that. So I guess that's another good thing to really encourage private sectors to help the government solve societal problems.
Right.
And I think that is Hector around, still here? Because maybe he can, Hector just left. I think he's not. Oh yeah, there you are. Hector, maybe
Hector,
you would like to share part of your experience in Chile, in Latin America, in Europe. What do you think about the whole thing? The whole enchilada.
No? Chile, America, Europe.
In 25 words.
In 30 seconds. No, I think this discussion is very important because it has to be finally with the. I'm talking about the public sector. It's matter of political will. For example, at the European Community level, I can find political will to establish some regulations about these topics, these situations. I can remember that 2 or 3 years ago, the European Parliament prepared and sent to the Commission, to the European Commission, a recommendation, but asking at the same time to prepare a regulation, a specific regulation in artificial intelligence, the relationship between artificial intelligence, robotic automatization, and citizenship, for example, and the European Commission is preparing this regulation. And you know, this is an important thing, the decision system of the European Community is a very interesting decision system because maybe can take years and years to take a decision in these critical issues. But when the decision is taken, the decision is a regulation for the whole European Commission and through a directive delivered by the European Commission and is preceptive to the state to accomplish the. So I think it's a matter of political will. At the international or multilateral organizations, we have a problem that a difference of the European Community is the European Union. For example, at the World Trade Organization, the decision system is by unanimity, is by consensus. So you cannot advance too much because this kind of system at the World Trade Organization, we were trying, was ambassador there, we are trying to change that system because it's not possible to advance because only one country can block a decision. For example, the United States blocked all the system of dispute solution system for years. Well, that's my comment I can give about the point that Elizabeth said. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Hector. Any other questions or thoughts, ideas you want to share?
Okay. No, I think it's okay. We can continuing discussion about this. But the relationship between the public sector and the private sector is one of the other issues that we discussing. But I think there is some kind of convergence between the public and the private sector because of the pandemic. Because the pandemic is one of the accelerators of this kind of we have to be optimistic about the future possibilities that the international community make advances in the regulations, in the to accomplish the different goals we have. And to be pessimistic, I can remember what one good friend of mine usually said. One pessimistic person is an optimistic, well-informed. So I think we have to be well-informed, but at the same time be. Thank you.
There is an interesting question from Maria in the chat room to Jerry concerning synergies on how politics and artificial intelligence can play along together. That continues practically what we were just talking about, governance and so. So Jerry, that's a really complex question. Politics and artificial intelligence play along.
Yeah. So let's see. Am I going to go to the positive side or the negative side? is crowded on both sides. The information warfare is added by artificial intelligence. It's got to the point that you can get exactly to an individual person with an individual message, individual keywords, with individual manipulation of your not liking something to your hating something. So that's the downside. The good side is I don't think you can run civilization in the future without artificial intelligence. I mean, consider how complex just transportation in a city is. Just transportation, let alone the sewer system, electrical system. I mean, you can't run an electrical grid without artificial intelligence. I mean, you can't do it. So as society gets more complex, the requirement for regulations, which is government, and it's going to be required artificial intelligence to do that. So, but it's a double-edged sword. The artificial intelligence within government is both ripping up people in information warfare and also making the infrastructure work. So, I mean, we could go rattling on, but that's sort of the quick overview.
So the synergies are the antagonists also.
You say again?
Synergies are also the antagonisms also. So
they work both ways. That's
both ways,
right.
yeah.
Both ways, yeah. Unfortunately. No.
Yes.
How?
Sorry, Elizabeth. Yes, please.
Yeah, please go ahead.
There's another question here from Chris. Did I get it correctly that this is for Jerome? Did I get it correctly that in all three feature scenarios, the common feature is that of decentralized system in both public and private realms?
Yes, but sort of. Decentralization and centralization can happen at the same time. They can be reinforcing trends. For example, a good example is, we have on our telephone this little connector that you can use in Argentina, in Chile, in Romania, in Mexico, all around the world. But that was a centralized decision for a decentralized application. So centralization and decentralization can actually work together. Decentralization doesn't necessarily mean chaos. It can mean efficiency. For example, we have centralized software beating viruses. but we've decentralized the responsibility. I don't ask the government to protect my computer. I ask Norton to sell me something, and I have to upload it, and I have to update. I have to do. We've distributed the responsibility for virus prevention. Now, but that comes from a group of corporations that are centralized in that sense. One of the things I would say in general that I've learned over a couple of years of doing this stuff is that whatever you look at, imagine how it could become more complex than you think is possible. Then think that through, and then double it. I suspect you'll get closer to what'll actually likely to happen. So I expect increased decentralization. Remember that the power after the corporation becomes the individual. So a lot of power gets really decentralized in the future, but you still have an awful lot of centralization of the quality control of things. That's why I use the telephone connector as an example. But we don't see, but like we didn't do this with computer connections, right? We've all got these different computer connections driving us nuts of having to have so many different connections and so many wires. I mean, how many of us have a box full of all kinds of computer wires? But we don't have it with telephone wires. Why? Because we centralized the decision on that. We decentralized the stuff on the computer wires, and we got a mess. So anyway, I'm rambling on. So the answer is both. You'll have increased centralization of a lot of things. You'll have increased decentralization of a lot of things. And they're not in contradiction necessarily at all. Okay, that pretty well takes care of all the rest of the questions. The answer is both. What's the question?
What about democracy, Jerry?
Well, as you know, for those of you that haven't, you can go to our website, the Millennium Project, Millennium, spelled the English way, not the French way, -project.org. You can go on to where it says 15 Global Challenges, click on 4 for democracy. And in there, we have democracy as being a relationship between the governed and the government, where the government is responsive to the public, especially in terms of reinforcing civil rights and so forth. But the individuals have got to do their 2 cents as well. We can't just sit on our butt. And I would say one of the weaknesses of democracy at the moment is we're not responsive. We're not engaging as much as we should. Because if you don't have a responsive public, you might as well have a dictatorship and have done with it. So I would say part of the future democracy's got to do with civics education, people learning. You have a role here. You're not just a passenger on a train, you know.
But I was referring in the conditions of general artificial when we get to the general artificial intelligence, and practically you are more intelligent, you have more access to knowledge, you have more. Do you think people will exercise more their rights or less, or any guess is good? I would just like to hear opinions.
You just want to hear some guesses. Okay, some guesses. All right. It makes it easier for me to participate if I'm integrated with AI in government response. For example, if I'm walking down a street and I see a pothole, I might immediately at that, see right now, if I don't have a telephone number to call, I can do it, but I don't know the telephone number for the mayor's office, say, hey, there's a hole here, got to get it fixed. But if I have, my little contact lens here and I look at it, I immediately say, fix it. So it knows the location, it's got the image, it's got the response back to the government, and it may even keep a record so that if nothing is done within a week or two, it says, hey, you forgot about the hole in the road. So with that simple example, you can see how AI could make the citizen more responsive and more responsible because it becomes easier. I mean, an old-fashioned trick of business is make your product easier to use than the other people, and guess what? You'll win. So AI could make citizenship easier, conceivably.
And
of course, on the other side of the coin, you can also control people. So this is both sides again.
Right, but probably people will also realize more how much they are controlled or not, and eventually set some rules or barriers. If there will be still something like privacy left of it.
I'm not optimistic about privacy, as you know. If somebody's got it, great.
If somebody thinks they got it,
even that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah, it's a very interesting conversation. Like, for example, you're trying to like figure out how would this evolve from the lens using the AI as a lens, in the context of all of the conversation that we're having. But of course, we as human beings think that we won't just be a spectator here, right? Like just
right.
Watching how AI grow and evolve and develop, become super intelligent. Now, but however, this might lead to another conversation, but I would just like to ask this question. Like, what do you think about genetic augmentation? Yeah, we're going to have to find a way to some sort of like.
Well, I would like to go back to I'd like to go back to a conversation Elizabeth and I had when we were writing some science and technology scenarios eons ago, where I put in something about the genetic enhancement for intelligence, because most parents want their children to be more intelligent and they don't want them to be dumb. So if there's a possibility of enhancing, then, and even if the United States says you can't do it, then we go to Switzerland and we get it done, right? So I think stopping that is almost impossible. However, Elizabeth came in, and she can correct me if I get this wrong, says, wait a minute, we don't want to make a bunch of smart Hitlers. So that we could, just like we have building codes, you can't build a building a certain way unless you have the safety thing. So maybe we can say that you can't use a genetic material on brain enhancement unless you also use a genetic material on compassion. That intelligence and compassion have got to go together. That could be maybe a building code for the future of humans. Elizabeth?
Well, yes, I am still worried about enhance Hitlers, and because what I'm mostly worried of is because those, for example, organized crime or associated with terrorism, and so they have the money, for now at least, to buy the best code writers, and so, and it depends on how AI, on what ethical basis AI will evolve. And when it will get to write its own codes, for us, it might be too late already, any regulation or anything. So yes, I am still worried. Try to be more optimistic, but
Good. So we got to keep track of the biome research on compassion genes, because it's usually not a single gene. It's usually a combination of genes that has a trait. Maybe we'll have to keep a track of that and push our singularity friends into keeping track of that as well, because intelligence by itself is not enough. And knowledge by itself is not enough either. That's that little pyramid going up to wisdom is important, because as you know, Germany was one of the most educated people on the planet when Hitler took over. So intelligence is not enough. Knowledge is not enough. We have to have the wisdom part and the right use of this sort of stuff. Can genetic engineering help the right use of this stuff? I would suspect, why not? You would probably can figure out the pattern of genes to improve compassion and those values that we want.
exactly. But on the values, there are different systems of values, and who
we don't have
decides.
to agree on everything.
No, but
let's say
at
there's
least
10 things. Let's say that everybody agrees on 2 things. Then let's just do the 2 first. This is one of my complaints against large-scale systems. Is if we can't get it all right, we don't get a decision. So let's say there's only 2 things in the world we can agree on, whatever they are. Then let's start there, because we can't really wait on this stuff too long. It'll move beyond us if we don't begin to move.
right, and others will agree on not 2 but only 1 thing, but that might be the wrong one, and advance.
Yeah,
and they advance again. They advance against all the rest of humanity, and you have no control by the time you realize what happened.
Well, the good news on going back to the example about the internet, we didn't do much of the technology forecasting assessment. There's tons of it going on with genetic engineering, as there is with the AI stuff. So at least much, I mean, you don't necessarily have to have the entire world engaged in the conversation, but I think we've got enough people have been alerted that now it's time to roll up our sleeves and say, then how do we do the anticipatory governance? Because if we just say, here's a problem, here's a problem, here's a problem, we don't get around to the solution. And as you heard me say many times, we got to give equal time to solution. Now I want to shift the conversation a little bit. We got to give more time, because I mean, most of the world knows there's a downside to AI. Most of the world knows there's a downside to genetic engineering. Okay, we got that. It doesn't mean we stop analyzing it, but I think we got to give even more time. Says, okay, now what do we do about it?
Or just figure out, identify which are the good stuff, and advance towards that. And maybe the bad stuff will take care of itself then, if we advance toward the good stuff.
Inshallah.
Well, yeah, because instead of being in defensive all the time,
right,
you can be offensive on what people agree it's the good stuff, because that's, again, it's a matter of who decides what's good or wrong. And maybe then that gets the worries get addressed.
Yeah. Okay. We're having really a good conversation here, but I hate to close this one. Mara has just reminded us that it's time to close the streaming and the recording, but we can say bye and then keep discussing if you wish.
Yeah, we're only 30. We're only 38. We're only 38 minutes over time.
I mean, we can say people are watching our discussions and recording over the years, but you know.
Yeah.
I just want to say something to close these conversations. I had much fun. Thank you, everybody, for coming, both to the participants and to the speakers. I had some very nice and good insights. I think it is important to keep talking about the futures and the different ways through which we can discover, adapt, and manage the future. So that's why I try to organize this future conversation, and it was really great. Thank you very much. So,
and on behalf of everybody, let's give her a round of applause, Mara, for the great work you did.
Yeah, Mara. Excellent.
Pleasure, really. But I did it because of you. You know, you are such great speakers, and the dams were so important. So I'm very happy we did it. And we can think about something in the coming year, you know, to keep this thing going on, because having people jumping on and participating to the discussion is very interesting for many aspects. So thank you, everybody. Really nice. I think, Shermon, you want to close the session, Lizan, Concepción, before stopping the streaming?
Bye-bye.
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 Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.